All right, let's get going with the vulva self-check. I'd like you to open up the attachment called the non-muscle pelvic floor self-check tracker. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be tracking and checking from the clitoral hood to the opening of the vagina. So those things we're going to be tracking for today. Okay. So I think this model is, well, we're going to start here and then we'll do some things on the other models too. Okay, so first off is the clitoral hood. Okay, you're looking at it. What does the appearance look like? Are there any moles? Are there any rashes? Are there any bumps? And then actually feel it too. So feel kind of on either side here and gently touch the top. Are there any growths? Are there any lesions, any sores or openings? So looking at the tissue and then feeling the tissue. Something that we're seeing more and more of is that there are restrictions that can happen here over time. So you literally want to kind of get on either side of that hood and gently stretch it up like that. Okay, can you stretch it up? I'm not saying get right on that clitoris and pull up because this is very, very sensitive. Remember, 8,000 nerve endings. But here, pull it up. Are you able to stretch it? Can you stretch it out a little bit like that? How does that tissue move? Okay, so we're looking at light pressure. We're looking at deeper pressure. So with the light pressure, is there pain? Yes or no? With the deeper pressure, is there pain? Yes or no? Is there scar tissue? So sometimes there might be scar tissue from a variety of things, but sometimes with childbirth, with a vaginal delivery, you can actually tear up towards the clitoris. So is there scar tissue? If there is scar tissue, how is that scar tissue moving? Is it restricted? Does it feel like one side is kind of stuck and the other side is moving a lot better? How is the sensation? So when you're touching, does it feel the same side to side? Does it feel kind of numb where you don't feel something on one side or the other? The other thing is hypersensitivity. So I would gauge that right versus left, okay? Because remember, this is a very sensitive area of the body. So you're going to have what feels like hypersensitivity, but basically does one side feel more sensitive and than the other, okay? And then the last thing here is referred symptoms. So when you're checking this and feeling this and moving this, does this shoot pain? Do you feel pain in your hip? Do you feel pain up in your belly? Do you feel pain down in your anus or symptoms like numbness or tingling, that kind of thing? And then you'll take out your self-checker, and we just looked at the clitoral hood. So the appearance, you're going to write anything relevant down there. Pain, light pressure, yes or no. Deep pressure, yes or no. And WNL means within normal limits. So if everything is moving well and everything, appearance here. So WNL means within normal limits. So if you don't see any of these issues here, you would put WNL. Pain, yes or no. Deep pressure, pain, yes or no. Insertion is not applicable. We're not inserting anything. We can't even if we tried. Scar tissue, yes or no. Restricted movement, yes or no. Sensation. WNL means within normal limits, or is it hypersensitive, meaning if one side is more sensitive than the other, or hyposensitive, meaning one side has reduced sensation or numbness. And then referred symptoms, yes or no, and then any comments there. I want to reiterate that this isn't medical advice for you. It doesn't replace evaluation by a qualified healthcare provider. So you can do your best to look, but a provider is going to be the best person to look down there. But even with that provider, I still advocate for you to do this to yourself and look at yourself and check yourself, okay? Because you're going to be the one that's most familiar with potential changes in your body, and now you'll you'll have this baseline of where you are, and I would make sure you date this as well. So you have the date, save this download so that you can use it in the future to compare. Okay, the next structure on the list is the glans clitoris. I do want to mention here that the clitoral hood on this model, it literally lifts up like that. And that's not how our bodies are. It's very much like that other model where you're going to kind of stretch the skin and pull it up, kind of stretching the skin and pulling it up. And it's not going to look like this round ball here like this does either. It'll look more fleshy. So next structure is glans clitoris, and I would just look at it, okay? If you want to touch it, you can, but it has over 8,000 nerve endings, and it's a very, very sensitive structure, and it's one of the most important structures for female body sexual satisfaction. So I would definitely remember this structure. Most female bodies need stimulation of the clitoris to achieve orgasm. So understanding that this is where that happens, woohoo, yes. But during the self-check, you know, you may not want to go down that road, or you may want to, it's up to you. But understanding that's the hood and then the clitoris underneath, and you're wanting to make sure that things are moving. So on the side, palpating that side, moving the side, just like we did on the clitoral hood there. All right, our next structure is the urethral opening. So on this model, remember, we have the urethral opening and it looks like a flower. You're not going to look like a flower. It's going to be very, very difficult to find it. It's going to be a small, almost like a little pinpoint of an opening. That's where pee comes out. So looking at that urethral opening, stretching it a little bit, how does it feel? Does the tissue kind of move up and down? Is there good mobility in the tissue? It's not going to move as much as this model does probably, but you know, we do want those tissues to move. There's something called lichen sclerosis. And so this is a skin condition where the tissue gets really, really shiny. It looks kind of white. There might be bumps on it and it doesn't move very well, and it can be very painful. And so that's something that if you're noticing any of these changes, so that's why we're looking for the appearance of the skin, how the skin moves, how the tissue moves, and if you're having any of those other things like moles, growths, rash, that kind of thing, then getting help so that you know that getting checked out, right? That can really improve your quality of life. So looking there. Then we're going to move on to the labia majora. The labia majora are the outer lips. And so these are the lips that would have hair. Okay. So these are the lips that have hair. Now on this model here, these are the outer lips, okay? And here is where I really, really, really want you to go through every category that you can on our tracker. So the labia majora, do you notice any of these things? Moles, bumps, rash, lesions, growth, discoloration, shining. I actually want you to touch that labia majora. Let's do it on this one, okay? So gently, gently press in. Press in along the length of the labia majora. This is light pressure, okay? So pressing in, and then you're going to do deep pressure. Remember that I'm not wanting you to cause yourself pain. So if you press in and the deep pressure causes pain, back off and make a little note on your self tracker. Insertion doesn't apply here. There's nothing to, no ability to insert anything there. Is there scar tissue? So sometimes there can be scar tissue from a variety of things. again, the main cause would be vaginal delivery, that you have a tear that goes through the labia minora and into the labia majora, but that's not a really common thing that we see. But if there is scar tissue, is it restricted? Even if there isn't scar tissue, is that labia or the labia majora, like grab a piece of skin, grab kind of one area of the skin and moving it up and down, up and down. Is it moving well? Does it move out and in, up and down? And then working the whole length of the labia majora to see how it moves. And I know this sounds like it's going to take a really long time, but once you kind of get into the rhythm, you can do both, you could do this in under 5 minutes. All right. Now, sensation. So is it hyposensitive, which means it's kind of numb, it's not feeling, maybe one side feels different than the other? Or is it hypersensitive, where it's very, when you touch it, it's very, very difficult to touch, right? You can't tolerate that touch. It's ultra sensitive. And then are there any referred symptoms when you do that? Now we're going to move into the labia minora and do the same thing that we just did with the labia majora. So we're looking at it, looking at the appearance, touching, light pressure, deep pressure. Is there any pain with either of those? Is there scar tissue? If there's scar tissue, checking to see how is that scar tissue moving? Does it move? Is it going side to side, up and down? Is it restricted? And even if there isn't scar tissue, are the labia minora moving? Because remember, like for that one example with lichen sclerosis, the whole vulva kind of tightens up, that tissue tightens up. And so you can have restrictions. And sometimes the labia minora even get resorbed. So the body kind of almost sucks them in. Like they kind of, it's called resorption, where they kind of just melt into the background of the vulvar tissue there, and they're very difficult to identify as a separate structure. Okay, restricted movement, and then sensation. So again, right to left, is it hypersensitive, is it hyposensitive, and checking the length of the labia minora, and then are there any referred symptoms when you're doing this? Now we're moving to the opening of the vaginal canal. So here's that opening of the vaginal canal. You're looking at it, okay? So do you see anything at the opening? Moles, bumps, rash, lesions, growth, discoloration? Is the tissue shiny? Is it kind of wet and lubricated? Is it pink? Is it red? Is it white? So what does it look like? And then around the opening of that vaginal opening, put some pressure. So light pressure. And I would kind of start here at 6 o'clock. If you think about the vaginal opening like a clock, this would be 12, 6, 3, well, 3 and 9. Depending on how your clock is going. So I would come down here and press. Okay, so light pressure just around the opening, and then deeper pressure around the opening. Is there scar tissue? Do you see any scar tissue? Is there restricted movement? How is the sensation? Is it very ultra sensitive? Is it not very sensitive? So do you have numbness? And then is there any referred pain when you touch? What it could look like here on this model is that you're just kind of doing this around the opening, okay? So we're not going inside yet, but we're checking the different clock positions to see how that entrance to the vagina is doing. And then the last one that we're going to do on this self-check is the opening, the actual vaginal canal itself. So you're inserting a finger into, let's see. I'm trying to not have the shadow apparent. So you're inserting a finger into the vaginal canal. And how does that insert? So is insertion painful? Is insertion restricted? Does it feel like you can insert all the way up to, you know, your finger without any difficulty? So first off, insertion, is it within normal limits, or does it feel like there's pain or restriction or something that's kind of getting blocked if you insert? Now, the vaginal canal, when you insert, it's kind of going back towards your anus. So I wouldn't have your finger pointed forward towards your pubic bone. I would have your finger or your thumb kind of pointed backwards towards your anus. And it really depends on your anatomy here. Okay. I know this is just, please don't don't screenshot this one. Okay. And share it on social media. Anything else you can. So basically your anatomy here, depending on your mobility and how you're built. So a lot of times it's going to be easier to insert that thumb, and you're kind of pressing in, you're going into the vaginal canal, and then you're kind of going down towards the anus. But you can also use your finger, and if you have the dexterity to be able to kind of rotate your finger down and push it down, you can do that. But I'm hypermobile, and that's a tricky position even for me. So let's go with our self tracker. If you're able to actually visualize some of the walls of the vaginal canal, great. If you can't, that's okay. Looking at it, do you see any rashes? Is there any discoloration? Does it look white and shiny? Is it pink and reddish and kind of juicy? That's what we love. Does the tissue seem very dry? So that's something else that you could check. Now let's look at pain. What I'd like you to do is, with that vaginal canal, think about the clock. So here's 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and then 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock. You just choose, 3 o'clock is your left hip, 9 o'clock is your right hip. So checking those 4 o'clock positions to start off with. So first, light pressure at 6 o'clock. How does that feel? And you're inserting as far as you can and kind of pressing down on that vaginal canal. I didn't say this on this lesson specifically, but you need to be cleared for vaginal insertion before you do this check. Okay, so if you've just had a baby, you need to make sure that you're cleared for insertion before doing this. And also remembering to look at all the red flags and so forth. Okay, so looking at 6 o'clock, light pressure. Does it hurt? Yes or no? 3 o'clock, light pressure. Does it hurt? Yes or no? 9 o'clock, light pressure. Does it hurt? Yes or no? And then 12 o'clock. So you're kind of coming up toward the pubic bone. That's a harder one, because literally when you are pressing up, even though it looks here like there's so much space in between that vaginal opening and the pubic bone, it's really not that much space. And so when you're pressing up towards the 12 o'clock, that's going to be the pubic bone right underneath your thumb or your finger, if you're able to manipulate that way. And that can be very painful to kind of smash that tissue. So it's not something that and you have your urethra, that's the canal where the urine exits, that's right in between the vaginal canal and the pubic bone. So as you press up, you're kind of pressing on that urethra, and you're kind of smashing the tissue. So I wouldn't expect it to be comfortable, but I also wouldn't expect it to be like really painful either. So just kind of keeping an eye on that, and also understanding that this is your baseline. So understanding what your baseline is, and then when you do a future check, and let's say you did it today and it wasn't painful, but you did it in 3 months and it was really painful to do that. Well, that's then a warning sign for your body, like, hey, something might be going on. All right, so we did the light pressure, and then do deep pressure at all those clock positions. I'm showing you how to do those 4 o'clock positions. I don't want to overwhelm you, but you can do more clock positions. Like if you want to do a 4:30, you want to do a 7:30, you want to do some diagonal positions, you can. It's your body. You can go inside your vaginal canal and press around. But just just understand that most of the times we'll find issues in those 4 o'clock positions if they exist. Okay. Insertion. So was it within normal limits to insert? Was there pain or restriction? Is there any scar tissue inside the vaginal canal? Yes or no? If there is, how is that scar tissue moving? Is it restricted? Is it painful? And even if there isn't scar tissue, how is the tissue moving inside? Are you able to move around? Kind of think about like sweeping like a U from that 3 o'clock to the 9 o'clock. Woo! I didn't tell you this, but please use lubrication. I'm so sorry that I forgot to say this. I'll put it in the comments, but these self-checks are much better when you use lubrication. And then sensation. So does it feel kind of normal side to side? Is it hypersensitive? So let's say 3 o'clock is hypersensitive, then you'd write that on your comment sheet. 3 o'clock is hypersensitive, meaning it's really ultra sensitive, very, very sensitive compared to the rest of the clock. Or is it hyposensitive, which is kind of a numb feeling? And then when you push, is there referred symptoms? So do you feel pain in your hip? Do you feel numbness go down your leg? Do you feel something in your pubic bone? So that is the basics of a vulva self-check. Some other things that you that I didn't include here, but that would be important for you to kind of keep an eye on are discharge. Okay, so is the discharge kind of like a whitish, clearish fluid and kind of mainly odorless or very small odor? Then fine, that's great, no problem there. But if the discharge is greenish or yellowish or has a odor or has blood in it, you know, those are symptoms and that you would want to get that checked out. And then in general, the odor. So I know that that's a really sensitive topic for a lot of people, like, oh, do I smell down there? A smell is normal. We all have our own unique smell. And so to try to completely rid our bodies of our smells is, you know, I think a really sad thing that a lot of companies are trying to make people feel insecure, that you have to smell like roses or flowers to be normal or to be attractive or to have somebody want you, right? Or to be healthy. And that's not the case. Everyone has their own unique smell. So identifying what your smell is, and then as you do your self-checks, recognizing, hey, this is a different smell. This isn't quite what I smelled like before. Maybe I want to get checked out. All right, so thank you for your time. I know that I kind of sometimes go off on paths, and I hope that you like my teaching style. If you have any questions, drop them below. I hope that this was helpful and that it gives you a baseline starting point of how to look at your own vulva and check your tissues down there. Next, we are going to be going from here down. Okay, so we did from here up. Well, we did from here to here. Now we're going to do from here to here. And then after that, we're going to do from here up to the belly button. So these are the structures that we're going to be looking at in this self-check. Okay. So we're going to be looking at the perineal body, the external anus, the external anus, that's where poop comes out. Okay. The coccyx, which is a fancy name for the tailbone. Ischial tuberosities, which are your sit bones. We're going to look at the anal canal. And then in the next one, we'll look at pubic bone and belly. Just to review that anatomy, remember that's the vaginal opening and then this area in between the vaginal opening and the anus. This is called the perineal body. Then here's the anus. And the anus is that little hole, but then you have, it's almost like a, they're called rugae. So it's kind of like a star almost, where you have these little creases that go out from the anus. And so we're going to be looking at that too. Okay, so perineal body, that's the vaginal opening and that's the anus. This is the perineal body. This is the area that usually, if you tear, this is typically the area where you tear. And so I really want you to look at this. First, we're looking appearance. So does it look normal? Are there any moles, rashes, bumps, lesions, growths? Does it look discolored? Is it shiny? And then also, do you see a scar? Did you tear? Okay. A lot of times, if you tore, the body has an amazing way of healing. And so you may not even be able to see it, or if you see it, it might just be a very, very faint line. It's not a problem if you don't see a scar. That's a beautiful thing. That means your body healed beautifully. If you see a scar, though, then we just identify it and see what it looks like and get your baseline. Now we're going to touch, we're going to press on the perineal body. Okay. So there's different ways that you can do this. What I like to do is the light pressure. So just gently pressing in. And you see, remember, underneath the skin, you have all these muscles that we're going to be talking about in a couple more self-checks down the road. Okay, so, but light pressure, is that painful? Yes or no? So kind of start at the top, light pressure, and then deeper pressure. Is that deeper pressure painful? Yes or no? There's no insertion that happens here. Is there scar tissue? So this is really where the rubber meets the road with how we're going to look at our scars. So I want you to feel that scar kind of go up and down. Is the scar sensitive or does it move? Is it tight? Can you go side to side? This pelvis opens. So if you open, you definitely need to go see your healthcare provider, because you should not be opening when you go side to side. Okay, so scar tissue, and then also kind of going in diagonal. I'm going to do a model that doesn't open because that's just bothering me. Okay, so the stretching side to side, stretching up and down, going in circles, going in counterclockwise circles. How are things moving? So we're looking at, do you have a scar tissue, and is there restricted movement? Is there pain? And then when you're doing this, are there referred symptoms? Is it sending numbness? Is it sending tingling? Is it sending pain somewhere else other than where you're touching? And what is the sensation like? So does it feel normal? Underneath that scar, does it feel numb? You know, because with a scar, or if you had an episiotomy, which is where they cut you, you know, the nerve endings, you have nerve endings on your skin. And so sometimes scars don't always have sensation to them. Or is it hypersensitive? So is it hyposensitive, where you have numbness, or is it hypersensitive? And then are there referred symptoms when you're doing that? So again, remember, none of these are like, unless if you were splitting open when you were stretching, then you need to go to see a healthcare provider immediately. But for the most part, if you had pain, if you had restricted movement, okay, identifying that's your baseline, and then we have what your baseline is. We can work on your baseline, and then when you check yourself in the future, are those symptoms better? Did they get worse? Did they change? And so you have an awareness of your